What could be better than a brutal tournament in MMA? Of course, the answer is two brutal tournaments. Gary Goodridge, nicknamed Big Daddy, will head these nights of pain and suffering. A healthy heel with charisma, bare power, and animal aggression. When the World Arm Wrestling Champion decided to make his MMA tournament debut at UFC 8, few were surprised. In those years, many strongmen tried the octagon and paid for it with their health. Goodridge even won against the legendary John Brzenk, who inspired the acclaimed film starring Sylvester Stallone, Over the Top. It was 1996, and Goodridge's opponent was Paul Herrera. At that time, Goodridge had a Canadian super heavyweight title and a level 4 black belt in Kuk Silwan Korean martial arts. Sounds cool, but in reality, Goodridge got it on the first day of class. As it turned out, the Kuk Silwan gym was already training another guy for a fight at the UFC. They offered Goodridge a fight, and Goodridge won, after which he was offered a black belt and a kimono for free to advertise the fighting style. Herrera rushes into the fight and tries to move to the ground, but this is clearly a bad idea against a guy as powerful as Goodridge. Big Daddy immediately catches his opponent in the crucifix and throws a lot of blows with his elbows. But Herrera was knocked out after the first blow, and the subsequent punches left him with a fractured cheekbone as a bonus. It was Big Daddy's debut, and he immediately grabbed one of the most exotic and famous knockouts in MMA history. Before the fight, one of Goodridge's friends told him that Paul Herrera and Tank were racist white supremacists, which pissed off Goodridge. Of course, Tank was not a white supremacist, and Paul Herrera was Latino, eliminating any question of white supremacy. As a matter of fact, Tank Abbott hated everyone equally, regardless of skin color. Goodridge's next opponent was the famous fighter Jerry Bolander, who trained at Lion's Den with the Shamrock Brothers.
Okay, now there's three things that I'm bringing into this UFC 8 that nobody's never brought in all together at once before. Superior attitude, superior mind, superior strength. I've got it all, second to none. Big Daddy's bringing home the bacon.
Returning in his kimono, the fight begins. Bolander was only 21 years old, weighed about 90 kilograms, and inexplicably used a fighting technique absent enough physical strength to implement it properly. Goodridge pressed on him with his mass, being in a dominant position, but Bolander managed to reverse and even throw a few punches at Big Daddy. However, the difference in size was too great. Bolander even tried to do a submission move with his leg, but in the end received a few heavy blows to the head. An excellent technical victory for Goodridge, who found himself exhausted. Let me remind you that Gary trained just a month in the mysterious Kuk Silwan gym. Goodridge, thoroughly exhausted, is rewarded with a trip to the finals, where another future MMA legend, Don the Predator Frye, was waiting for him. As Goodridge himself recalled, he was going to withdraw from the tournament due to fatigue and a lack of normal preparation for the fight, but was persuaded by management to stay, agreeing to take another check home with him in the process. So the confrontation of the famous trilogy began. Goodridge again had the advantage in size, but he was opposed by the unusual fighter, who was an elite wrestler, a professional boxer, and a black belt in judo. The fast Frye started with jab, but Big Daddy decided to use his bearish power. Entering the clinch, Goodridge lifted Don and threw him to the floor, narrowly missing the soccer kick to catch up. As the Olympic wrestler who commented on this fight said, there was no technique in that throw, merely sheer strength. Frye accepts the rules of the game, and using the clinch, simply destroys Gary Goodridge with his cannon of a right uppercut. Gary again tries to throw Frye, but clings to the ropes as if clinging to his life. Having carried out such an impromptu throw, Frye goes to the mount, and after several blows, Goodridge surrenders, since he can no longer resist due to fatigue. A truly impressive fight, and of course, there is nothing but respect between these two men. Fast forward a year and a half, Brazil, 1997. Debut show of the coolest promotion, IVC. Back then, Goodridge was performing poorly, with a record of 1-5 in his last 6 fights. Now, however, he intended to prove to everyone that he was still effective.
Gary, Big Daddy Goodridge. My style? Kutsu One, wrestling, freestyle. Anything you want, that's my style. My expectations for this? Pain for everyone in my camp.
His opponent was Augusto Menezes Santos, nicknamed the Monster, which he probably gave himself. Goodridge drops this monster with a jab on the counterattack and gets into the clinch. It was necessary to leave Santos highlights of a real monster. Goodridge grips the opponent and tries the guillotine, but when he fails, he does a submission move to the spine in the Bas Rutten style. The monster is squeezed, and he has no choice but to surrender. Goodridge with a great win.
You know, the biggest thing you can do in this game is underestimate somebody. You see what I did with my first opponent? My next one's Cal Worsham. Good friend of mine, but he's going down just like the rest of them. Like I said, pain is what I deliver.
Cal Worsham was a guard at Folsom Prison where Frank Shamrock was serving his sentence. I wonder if they crossed paths. He had a base in Taekwondo, which made him an atypical protege of Mark Coleman, who trained only wrestlers. So he was Goodridge's teammate, and the fights between teammates turned out to be much tougher. And yes, Worsham is exactly the type that the legendary Tank Abbott almost threw out of the cage. For some reason, Worsham went into a clinch with the powerful Goodridge, for which he paid for by falling back on the canvas. He even screamed because there was probably an injury. Goodridge finished the fight pretty quickly by applying an armbar, causing Worsham to scream one last time. Big Daddy promised pain, and he kept his word. Pedro Otavio was Goodridge's opponent in the final. Once again, Goodridge enters the ring intent on winning his first tournament of his career.
Now, I'm not much of a street fighter, but they took away my 2 most favorite things to do, biting and eye gouging. Doesn't matter. Pain I'm delivering, pain you'll see. Check it out.
Pedro Otavio was a representative of the luta libre Brazilian style, a mixture of judo and freestyle wrestling. He did not look like Apollo, but since he reached the final, he was clearly a difficult fighter. Goodridge again begins the fight in a chaotic manner. Apparently, in the cage, he was more comfortable than in the ring. In the cage, Goodridge would have been fighting in a clinch for a long time, as he did with Don Frye. In the ring, one could immediately see his lack of skills. Finally, Goodridge throws the opponent off and begins to throw his heavy blows. Goodridge was even close to strangling Otavio, who managed to escape from the grip. A very sluggish fight began on the ground in which none of them particularly shined. Finally, Goodridge began to work, distracting his opponent with head blows. Goodridge attempts a submission, but the slippery Brazilian gets out again. Big Daddy turns on again and throws some heavy punches. Once on his back, Goodridge uses the secret tactics of the Goodridge clan. He puts his leg into Pedro's panties. This is possibly the strangest thing I've ever seen in MMA. According to Wikipedia, Gary squeezed Pedro's balls with his toes. That does not add respect for Goodridge, but these are fights with no rules. Blows to the groin, as well as clenching eggs, are allowed. Finally, Otavio decided that he still wants to contribute to the gene pool and escapes from the secret technique. The Brazilian decides to stay away from the ground and started working in the stance. But even here, Otavio is inferior to the Canadian. It seemed that Goodridge wanted to use these same secret tactics again. In this angle, it is invisible, but Gary grabbed his opponent's delicates with his hand and began to squeeze them like a gripper. and the World Arm Wrestling Champion can squeeze properly. Otavio is shocked by what is happening, but the referee forces him to continue. Goodridge breaks off the chain and starts to fight like a man. Moving the fight on the ground, he throws some good punches, and then lands a blow with the knee. Otavio surrenders. The referee clearly disliked Goodridge, but still, he judged the fight by the rules of that promotion, like a pro. Goodridge tried to make up with Otavio, but for obvious reasons, he didn't want to. Respect for Otavio for the fact that he did not want to fight fire with fire. But here, you can see a reminder that Coleman always supports his people to the end. This is an example of the dark side of fights without rules. It's worth noting that after such behavior, Goodridge was no longer invited to Brazil, but this was an isolated case for Goodridge. To forget Goodridge's questionable conduct, let's watch this fight in Pride against Valentijn Overeem in 2001. Witness Goodridge's cool exit in front of a full audience. The Dutchman Overeem was clearly technical in the stance, but he decided to clinch with Goodridge, landing a pair of powerful blows with the knees. Overeem was close to winning with a Kimura, but as Bas Rutten said, Goodridge has some of the strongest hands in MMA. Overeem gets a blow from a knee to the head and surrenders from a series of punches by Goodridge, who continues to beat the opponent after the gong. He was so obsessed with all of these that he had not heard the stoppage, and even bickered with his coach Mark Coleman in a friendly manner afterwards. An excellent win with a knee kick on the ground, a kick that is now prohibited. That's how Big Daddy triumphed in MMA. If you liked this video, be sure to press like, as well as leave your comments and subscribe to the channel. See you at the next tournament. Take care.